My name is Stacey Baran. I'm from a company called Ncube Data Science. We're out of Winnipeg, Canada. And today I'm going to be speaking to you about artificial intelligence and optimization in the casino industry. Now, it's funny, I think it was November 2019 when I attended my first GSA Technology Summit on AI. And it was an excellent meeting. And I remember at the conclusion of the meeting, we were all discussing, well, what do you think the technology we'll be discussing in, 2, 4, 8 years from now will be? What should we talk about then? And I think that the general consensus, I don't remember who said it, but I think the consensus was we're going to be talking about AI for the next 10 years at least. So here we are in 2021. It hasn't been 10 years yet, but I think that it's interesting that we're still discussing AI. Things have changed since 2019 even, and now the audience has changed. So I'm very excited to be speaking to regulators about artificial intelligence today. Now, I'm not going to claim to make any claim that I'm an expert in the, how AI can be used in the regulatory space or how AI can be regulated. But what I do want to do is share my knowledge of artificial intelligence and how I use it in the casino industry and other applications that I have seen in the casino industry. And I'm hoping that this will be beneficial to the audience. So just an overview of what I'm going to be speaking about today. I'll introduce myself a little bit and talk about my background. I want to talk about what is AI anyway, so just the basics of AI, and certainly, perhaps even more importantly, what AI isn't. There's some buyer beware messaging that I would like to share. Basically, we see more and more AI popping up everywhere within gaming. How do we properly vet that artificial intelligence? I'm going to talk about the types of AI. And AI and optimization go hand in hand. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit about optimization as well. And I want to go through some examples of AI and gambling, things that I have worked on personally, but also a few examples of things that are out there in other applications, and then talk about conclusions and insights that I've gained from using AI in gaming, both from the side of how do we promote innovation within the industry and new AI technologies, but also what have I learned just by using these AI applications that weren't necessarily obvious before? There's some pretty cool things that I like to share with people about that. So just a little bit about me. I am not traditionally from the gaming space. My education is in electrical and computer engineering. Before that, I was an astrophysicist working at telescopes like the one that you see here in the image. I was out at the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory in British Columbia. I did some time in Australia at some telescopes there as well. So that was another life ago. It was very fun. And after that, I spent about 10 years in research and development for using optimization methods for detecting breast cancer. And that kind of started to evolve towards AI applications in that as well. But while I was doing that work, I really wanted to apply technology to industry and to a space that I hadn't been in yet. And my business partner had invented an amazing AI platform that I'm going to introduce to you. And I was reading some academic papers and I came across a paper on slot floor optimization. And I discovered that the casino industry has huge amounts of very rich and very detailed data. And it really just kind of blossomed from there. And we've been doing AI applications in casinos ever since. So we focus on slot floor optimization primarily, AI-based segmentation, and we've done some AI techniques for futures trading, which has some applicability to sports books as well. So Cubist is the name of the core artificial intelligence software that we use at Ncube Data Science. Now, Cubist is a bit different than other AI platforms out there. It's really the only AI-guided evolutionary optimization platform of its kind globally. And what it does is it uses intelligent, human-like divide and conquer strategies to solve really large-scale optimization problems. As you can imagine, slot floors can be huge, so optimizing slot floors can be very computationally intensive. It's established technology. It's been under constant R&D since 2002. It's been the subject of many peer-reviewed publications. And the reason why I'm bringing it up so early in the presentation, I realize it's a bit of a, it's a big jump right in the beginning, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because the same underlying code base is used in astrophysics. It's used in cancer radiation treatment planning. It drives algorithmic trading strategies in finance, and there's several other applications outside of gaming that we use it for. And now there are multiple applications in the casino industry. And the reason why I think this is important is because AI engines themselves are industry agnostic. So whether you're downloading a neural network or using this platform, the AI doesn't really care what industry it's being applied to. It's just a matter of getting large amounts of data or being able to present a good math model. So some AI applications in gaming that I've worked on and that I've seen, for example, are slot floor optimization, AI-driven segmentation, certainly for marketing campaigns or to be, understanding player behavior for slot floor optimization. There's early VIP detection, which is a very interesting application, and some of the same technology can be used for early problem gambling detection as well. General financial optimization can be an excellent application for AI, whether that's across the casino or across a business. It's being used in facial recognition, fraud, money laundering detection, and also in sportsbook and trading automation. So what is AI anyway? Well, generally speaking, an algorithm that does intelligent things that humans are normally good at, but classical computer programs are not. You hear about machine learning a lot. This is a subset of AI. Some algorithms can learn from data really without being explicitly told what problem they're trying to solve. Recent deep learning algorithms fall into this. I'm sure you've heard of those as also, but there's a lot of other techniques that fall into this category as well. Now, perhaps even more important, I think, is what isn't AI? Now, I'm sure as everyone was walking the floor at G2E or at the latest webinar, we start to see more and more AI applications within gaming and within products. And I think it's important to be able to understand, how to properly vet those. So what isn't AI? Well, classical kinds of statistical analysis, that's not AI. I mean, that can be great. Math models can be fantastic for analyzing businesses, but that's certainly not AI. Visualization on its own is not AI. So when a software relies heavily on a human to interpret visualizations in order to make decisions like traditional analytics, that's not AI in itself. And I use this image of this frustrated looking gentleman trying to look at different visualizations and determine what kind of decision he should make based on those visualizations. So the human brain itself is a pretty good neural network, but it's not AI in itself. And one thing that I think is important to mention is that AI is not going to take over the world. I think that there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom views out there of AI. I don't think that AI is scary, certainly not at this stage. And in fact, something that I often say is that if anything, we're in an age of artificial stupidity right now. So what you're seeing, these sophisticated computers that are taking over the world that you see in the movies, that's not going to happen. Right now, AI is an excellent tool in order to improve efficiency, whether it's improving our lives or improving our businesses. And it's certainly something to be embraced right now. So I want to talk a bit about, the buyer beware aspect in this new AI frontier. As I mentioned, as we start to walk trade show floors, we start to see more and more products that have that AI label on them, AI driven, AI powered. And I think it's important to be able to properly vet these products and determine what kind of value is actually being added. For example, you can download a neural network in an evening and apply it to a data set, and all of a sudden you have a product that is AI powered. Similarly, you could take a decade to custom write a program that utilizes AI and makes a very important business decision, and then that's AI powered as well. So how do you understand what the scale and value add of these different AIs happen to be? So stating that a product simply uses AI or machine learning without really specifying the type of AI is not particularly helpful. AI on the label doesn't really mean that a product is good. It doesn't imply that it's bad, but it doesn't really mean much of anything on its own. So I think, particularly when casinos are looking to purchase products, I think it's important to ask questions like what kind of AI or machine learning is being used? What's the technique that's being used? Can the provider of this technology answer that question? How does this help me compared to a traditional method? So if I'm buying something, if I'm spending a lot of money, is it really better than what was out there before? And I know Andrew Cardno gave an excellent talk at the previous session where, he was talking about the importance of not missing the AI boat. And while I absolutely agree with that, it's very important that that you're, I guess that if we don't want to miss the boat, it's important that you're getting on the right one. And not being fooled by people just slapping an AI label on it when you really don't need to necessarily be spending large amounts of money if it's not adding value. So I think it's important to ask, is this flashy, or is there actually added value that's coming from the AI component? Is this person just using AI because it's starting to be regarded as something that you just have to do? But I think it's important to be able to ask these questions. So in terms of the different types of AI that are out there, I would say, 99.9% of the time, when you're hearing about AI in an article or if it's in a product, it's going to be a neural network. It's a very, very popular type of AI. What it does is it simulates networks of nerve cells in order to be able to learn from historical data. It learns from this data to make predictions. So if there's something that it's seen before in a really large data set, then it can make predictions from that in order to make a decision. So these types of AIs can make accurate predictions. They're very widely used and they're very widely tested, and they're certainly available. So most programming languages out there, they have an AI like this that you can download and that you can apply to your big data. They do require big data. So the more data that you feed these types of algorithms, the better that they can do. But there's certainly an excellent type of AI that's out there, and it's very, very available. Now, I often don't like to use these types of AIs. And the reason for that is they have a black box character. So there's really no underlying model that's telling them what to do. They're really just looking at the data and making decisions based on that. I mean, that can sometimes, if it's customized, that can sometimes be changed. But this is typically the way that they're operated. They can't make an accurate prediction if it hasn't seen a scenario before. So if it has not seen something in the large data set that you've given it, it can't make any predictions if it hasn't seen it. It's very sensitive to noisy data. So those of you that have been working with casino data, sometimes you do see some errors within those data sets, whether it's an error code from a slot machine that doesn't necessarily correspond to a traditional slot event. AI like a neural network would see that particular event and interpret it as a data point. So you have to be very careful about feeding these types of AIs clean data. And one reason why I really don't like these types of AIs is that there's no story to tell. So when these AIs make a decision, even though they might be predictive, they might be accurate, there's really no reason behind that decision that can be communicated to a human. So it can be frustrating. While it's a great tool to implement, it can be frustrating not to know why it made a particular decision. Now, the types of AI that I'm more familiar with and that we like to use over at my company, Ncube, is called Evolutionary AI, and it's a little bit of a different approach. Now, while neural networks use large amounts of data to make predictions, Evolutionary AI is more of a search type of AI. So it's searching through many different types of solutions in order to find the best one. So the focus is often optimization, data modeling, kind of programs, designing programs. They're inspired by biological evolution. One benefit that I think is particularly powerful is that they can also utilize small data. So you don't always have to feed it a giant data set. It can boil down large data into smaller components and be able to learn from that. I mean, big data is certainly okay, but it can utilize smaller data sets as well. It uses models like mathematical formulas, a simulation, an algorithm that represents some sort of strategy or business decision. Now, I've put this both in the pros and the cons section because, it's a pro because there's some sort of interaction with an operator or someone that has domain knowledge, and you're learning about an industry that this is being applied to. And for that reason, your program can make very good decisions. Now, this is also in the cons section, because if you don't have that availability, if you don't have a mathematician and a casino operator that are speaking to each other, or a casino operator that knows how to program, this can be a difficult bridge. Now, these types of algorithms are robust to noisy data. So if there's some error in the data set, it can detect that. And what's great about it is because that model, even though it can be, not necessarily easy to write that model, the decisions are human understandable. So what comes out at the other end is, say, for example, in slot floor optimization, buy this many machine, this type of machine and this many, because, and whatever reason that may be, because this type of player likes it, or because it will shift players over that are playing this less profitable machine. So that's what I really like about it. Another con is that it uses large amounts of computer power. So these are not necessarily real-time solutions, but I think it's very cool that they're human understandable. AI and optimization go hand in hand. And, I think the goal is really to optimize business. For example, slot floor optimization, segmentation optimization for marketing, business strategy optimization, whether that be in casinos, It can be in treasury and supply chain. Really, the goal is to explore a wide range of alternative strategies for a business to find the best one. And the idea is to discover new efficiencies and improve the bottom line of a business. Some optimization techniques that are happening right now within the casino industry, visualization-based optimization is a huge one. Analytics. The strength is that a human brain, and I mentioned this earlier, the human brain is an excellent neural network in itself. It's very good at detecting patterns, presenting analytics to a human. It can certainly be extremely beneficial in making decisions for a business. The weakness is that it's not AI, it's not automated. It requires extensive human interaction, and it's not easily scalable. So if you have one person that's looking at huge amounts of data, you have to scale up your team as well. Linear programming is another one. If you're using Excel, if you're writing models, linear programming is a great tool. The weakness is that the real world is not linear, so eventually you'll hit a wall in your modeling, and it can be difficult to get past that in a linear modeling sense. So with evolutionary AI and optimizing business strategies, the strengths are that it's fully automated. There's intelligent exploration of model configurations. It can utilize linear and nonlinear models, so there's really no restriction on the form. It works well with noisy data. As I mentioned, it requires quite a bit of computing, and it's often not suited for real-time applications, unfortunately, but that's changing as we get more and more computing power available to us. Okay, so I've got a bit of time left, and I think I would really like to talk about some examples of AI in gambling and how they're being used. So something that I work on a lot is slot floor optimization. And I think an important question to ask is, why do we need AI for slot floor optimization? And I think the answer to that is that the slot floor is an ecosystem, and anyone that's been on a large slot floor can certainly see that there's a lot going on. It's a large ecosystem of players, of machines, and there's complex interactions happening between all those components. So every change on the floor is going to affect every other machine in the floor, whether that's because of dilution of interest, because of cannibalization, and there's secondary effects due to product placement as well, just adding another layer of complexities. So really, you can try to optimize a bank of machines or a region on your floor, and that's fine, but without the proper modeling tools or without AI, it's very difficult to understand how that particular change is going to ripple across the slot floor, and it certainly will. So really, in order to properly optimize a slot floor, you need a complex nonlinear model and you need AI, and that's really the key to generating uplifts in revenue. So our approach is to use this evolutionary AI to optimize a casino's mix of slot machines in order to increase slot revenue. So just taking you through the different steps in a systematic way in order, to show how AI is working here. So the first thing it does is it learns player preferences from a casino's own historical data. So that's big data, that's fine time resolution. It optimally segments both players and slot machines. So it uses additional AI techniques for this component as well. It provides specific slot purchasing and retirement recommendations that lead to a mix of products that's finely tuned to player preferences. So it's learning from data to determine player preferences. It optimizes the placement of the slot machines on the floor, and it provides a prediction of slot revenue after those changes. So it is a predictive algorithm. It's predicting the uplift in revenue, and it explores millions of different slot floor combinations before it settles on an optimal one. So this is something that a human couldn't do, and I think that's what's important to note about AI, is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to, figure out what's happening on the floor beyond a human's capability of understanding it. And this is just an example of what an AI searching through the slot floor, different slot floor configurations look like. So here it's optimizing coin in. We usually optimize win, but in this case, it's optimizing coin in. And you can see the increase in coin in as it's searching through different slot configurations, and eventually that levels off and we're left with the optimal slot floor configuration. So this has been implemented, this is out in the wild, and I think the most important thing to be able to say here is that even with the most seasoned slot managers, Pat Owens at Elwha River knows his floor better than anybody. He still finds benefit from using AI on his floor because it provides him with insights that he's not necessarily able to see, and also gives him time for other projects. So AI is really improving the efficiency of the slot operation over there. Now, AI optimized segmentation is also very important. Now, really, this can be used whether it's in slot floor optimization, it can be used for marketing, promotions, reinvestment. It's really important. And right now it's usually being done in an ad hoc way. So where do you put your boundaries when you're segmenting players for a promotion? I mean, sometimes that's just arbitrarily chosen. Often it's just arbitrarily chosen. So really you can use AI to determine what the best way is to segment. Another example is slot machine segmentation. So if you're designing a slot machine, there's so many different possible features of a slot machine that a player could be responding to. There's a lot of properties: game type, theme, manufacturer. There's other discrete qualities, but there's also continuous qualities: hold and volatility. How do you determine why a player is enjoying your game? Again, this is largely done in an ad hoc way, but by using AI, you can properly understand where these ranges should lie and where the boundaries should lie. So I think it's really important to be able to put this information over to an algorithm that's able to fully understand why those boundaries exist where they do. Now, this is an example of an AI segmentation, an AI searching through different players on a slot floor in order to segment them based on their behavior. So this AI is using historical slot data to search the player database and determine which players are playing the same on the floor. So this could be a huge player database, but it's able to search through it effectively. I mean, admittedly, this is sped up. This can take up to an hour to determine. But it's really trying to find, okay, where should I segment my players? Which ones are behaving the same? And this type of information can certainly be used for marketing and promotion, probably similar to the way Netflix profiles your movie choices. Hopefully better based on some of the movies that have been suggested to me lately. And similarly, this is just an example of AI optimized slot segmentation. Now, again, we don't want to be, if we're considering what games are appealing and what's appealing about a slot machine, we don't want to be married to a particular segmentation. And what's great about AI is it's able to search through the space and determine what is it that players are responding to. So here's a huge data set. What is it about a particular slot machine? I've got my player play behavior, and I have all the attributes of a slot machine. So find me the components of that slot machine that the players are responding to. So the AI can search through that. And what it does, it discovers the attributes that are actually contributing to a machine's performance. So in this case, we've got two different examples, one simpler than the other, but it's segmenting on cabinet type. And then you see it does kind of a tree structure to segment on hold. And then it can either branch into volatility or manufacturer. Now, one thing that I think is particularly important about this is it's not just one segmentation. So you can have a segment that includes volatility and you can have a segment that doesn't. So it's quite flexible, and it's actually telling the game designer or whoever's looking at the segmentation what's actually important about the slot machine, what are players enjoying about it. So AI-based segmentation, what else can it do? There's a ton of applications, and I think it's really the way that segmentation needs to go in order to be done accurately and properly. Well, we can look at segmentation of slot machine types, as I mentioned, use these for marketing promotions, and then as more data comes in from, which offers were redeemed, that data set can certainly be added and the AI can digest that and make better decisions based on that data. So it's just about growing that data set and understanding your players better. And finally, you could do something similar with online and social game offerings. This is being done a lot in the online world, determining which games and which properties of those games players are responding to and customizing their experience. It's, actually it's a fun problem, especially compared to brick and mortar where you have the real estate issue. I mean, you only have a limited amount of space there. In the online world, you can present whatever you like. So it's a very interesting application. And one last thing that I want to discuss in terms of applications are proactive VIP behavior detection. So I've been working with a gentleman on something like this before. He was an intern at our company for a while, and he was looking at neural networks to determine whether or not he could predict early VIP player detection. And he was actually able to come up with a list of players and the percent likelihood that they would convert to a VIP. So obviously, if you detect one of those players, the idea is to intervene early with offers and promotions to be able to ensure that they'll go to VIP status. Now, what's really interesting about this is not only the application itself, but that this very same technology can be applied to different things. So the same thing can be applied to detect almost any kind of anomalous behavior. So whether that's early problem gambling detection, neural networks can be used to determine that and the percent likelihood that that person might become a problem gambler. And it can also be used for AML techniques. Now I have a couple minutes left, and I just want to close with a couple insights that you can use now. So just kind of quickly going back to slot floors, and I think the take-home message here is that there are important subtleties on the slot floor that aren't discoverable by human operators that you need AI in order to be able to discover. One of the things that I discovered through AI was that casinos have too many machines on the floor. Now, that is probably more obvious now because of COVID than it was several years ago. But we certainly see that a lot where the AI algorithm chooses to remove machines from the floor in order to make more money for the casino. A popular machine is not always a good thing. If a machine is very popular, but it's not making that much money, chances are if you remove a couple of those machines, those players will shift to a more profitable machine. This is very difficult to determine without AI. If you don't understand your player segments and how your players behave when they're on the floor, it can be very difficult to determine that if you remove a popular but low performing machine, if those players will shift. So it's really important to be able to use AI for that analysis. The lowest performers are not always the priority for retirement. So often they are, they're just taking up real estate. They're not necessarily distracting players. So they're not always the highest priorities. And, you know, obviously there are dilution and cannibalization effects happening on the slot floor. To really understand predictively what's going to happen with those things as you add and take away machines, AI is an important tool in understanding that as well. AI can be embedded into existing tools, and they already exist in a lot of tools that are around businesses and casinos. There's AI components inside of Excel, inside of Microsoft Office, and there are AI tools out there that will talk to Excel as well, and that's what you're seeing in the movie. So it's not something that's inaccessible. If you're interested in AI, it's certainly something that can be explored. And I'll just close with some words on driving innovation in gambling in general. So as I mentioned earlier, I haven't come from gambling traditionally. I love this industry now that I'm in it. But it was not necessarily the easiest industry to break into. Although, you know, the people that we did meet were very, very welcoming, it can be very difficult to get data to be able to develop technology. And that was the major hurdle. So it wasn't until, you know, we were in the industry for, I would say, a year, we won a startup competition based on technology we built on synthetic data. When people started trusting us and they started allowing us to play with their data sets, that's when we really refined the model and we were able to refine our technology. So it would be fantastic. I know that casino data is very sensitive, but in order to innovate in this industry, it's crucial that data sets become available. So if there's any way that data sets can be made available, even if they're anonymous, you don't need to identify the casino source or the patrons. Scaling of financial data is okay for the most part, and non-current data is usually fine. I think this would go a long way to be able to driving innovation within the gambling industry, and for AI in particular that relies on these large data sets. So I think it's really important to get new people in from other industries and to be able to help innovate within AI and in casinos. So thank you very much. I'll leave it there. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to me by email or on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a discussion about any of this material. Thanks very much.